Rick Howard, and I am the Chief Security Officer here for Palo Alto Networks. I don't have enough hands to do all this, but you're here for the session, a C-level view of the latest attack vectors. Yes, everybody in the right spot? All right, fantastic. We have a fantastic panel for you, and I'm just going to let them introduce themselves. So, Sean, would you please do that? Sorry.
Sean Duca, Security Officer from Asia Pacific at Palo Alto Networks.
Hey, my name is Gus Coldebella. I'm a partner at the law firm of Fish & Richardson, and prior to that I was the general counsel at the Department of Homeland Security.
So my name is Erin Nealy Cox. I'm an executive managing director at Stroz Friedberg, and I run our global incident response business.
Thank you, guys. All right, so we're here to talk about how your organizations are dealing with the latest attack vectors, right? And this is going to be a little bit different from everything you've seen so far. This is going to be like Oprah Winfrey style, all right? This is audience participation. You got a point you want to make, you think we're full of crap up here, please raise your hand and join the conversation, all right? So one of the responsibilities that I have is running the threat intelligence team for Palo Alto Networks, Unit 42. Okay, they work for me. In the last year, they've done some 96 different reports on various attack actors and attack campaigns. And they're all coming after your networks, right? So what we want to do is highlight some of the more interesting ones and see how you all are dealing with it, all right? And the first one we want to bring up is the ransomware category. How many people have heard of the Cyber Threat Alliance? Anybody heard of that before? Okay, the Cyber Threat Alliance is a group of security vendors sharing threat information, and we went after Crypto Wall 3 last summer. Anybody hear of Crypto Wall 3? So we investigated that group for 90 days. Those guys, that campaign, those adversaries, those actors made $325 million in 90 days in ransomware, okay? Through Bitcoin, okay? Through Bitcoin, amazing, right? So you guys know how this works, right? Those bad guys come in and compromise grandma's machine at home, encrypts the hardware, encrypts the hard drive, and then somebody from the back office calls grandma and says, if you want your pictures of your cats and your grandkids, pay us $500 in Bitcoin, right? Think about the back office and that. They can walk grandma through a Bitcoin transaction to the tune of $500, okay? That's pretty phenomenal, right? And so that's one of the biggest things we've seen, this kind of ransomware thing. And the question we have for you all is, how are you dealing with this kind of a new threat? So Sean, I'm going to come to you in a second, so be ready, right? What are the things that you think you can do? Because once you get encrypted, you're already done, right? There isn't much you can do about fixing yourself. So what are the strategies your organizations are using to protect themselves from this kind of threat? So Sean, what do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. So obviously it's all around how do we start to prevent this from even happening in the first place. But a lot of the key things that I think we always need to think about is just security 101. Are you currently backing up your data in the event that something like this was to take place? The biggest question that I tend to ask a lot of organizations is, one, do you back up? Everyone always says yes. But then the other question that starts to become a little bit more interesting, starts to become a little bit more difficult, is when people say, or I ask the question, do you actually test your backups? Where are your backups stored? How regular do you actually test those processes? How do you go through that sort of triage or incident response inside your own organization? And that's where it starts to get a little bit difficult. And I kind of always strip it back to, let's start to make sure that you've got those best practices in place. But then when you start to think about how do I prevent this from happening, the main vectors that are always going to be either email or web. How do you start to prevent those types of threats from coming in? And obviously the bad guys are getting a little bit smarter. You know, gone are the days where all threats always used to call back home automatically. Some of the bad guys are now shipping the encryption key with their software, so it automatically encrypts that first time. So we need to start thinking about a couple of different ways to try and tackle that.
So this is a subtle difference. Ransomware is different from like espionage or crime, because those hackers are trying to steal stuff out of your network, right? In this particular case, they're actually making it so you cannot see your data anymore. So let's just do a poll of the audience. How many people have had to deal with a ransomware attack so far? Okay. What, about a quarter of the group? What did you guys do? What was it? Did we had any protections in place? Can you run a mic button? No, run a mic. Just like open. Wait. Go ahead.
It was one of those things where we did have good backups, luckily, and we were able to recover from it. However, the end user, it was a document. It was actually from she's a paralegal, and it was a document from somebody that she knew, and the problem was it said, do you want to enable macros? And she did, and
Yeah.
and so it's user awareness now. I've really started letting people know. Luckily, we did have good backups, and we were able to recover from it, and nothing from it. But it's really scary because it encrypted all of our map drives and everything. And it wasn't pleasant, but we were able to recover from it. But it took 5 hours of dealing with it.
Only 5 hours. That's not bad. Okay.
Yeah.
So Gus and Erin, I'm going to come to you guys about how corporate deals with this new kind of threat in a second. So stand by. I'll just give you a war story at Palo Alto Networks. When we released the white paper on Crypto Wall 3, the day before we released it, we said, "Are we protected from Crypto Wall 3?" So we spent that next day running around to make sure all the executives had their hard drives backed up other places than they normally do, because we were a little afraid that we didn't have the right protections in place. So, and they did, so it was good to go. So, Gus, let me ask you, is this coming up to board levels now? They're worried about this kind of ransomware threat?
Oh, it certainly is. And I mean, you just look at the news over the last 2 weeks, you have an entire hospital having its network disabled through this type of threat. I think what you raised and what's been sort of kicked around in the last panel and this one is, part of our job, part of the lawyer's job, but really part of the CISO's job is education. I mean, we have every employee out there who is our last line of defense and potentially our greatest vulnerability. If we're not training them on what the email vector of this looks like, then it's a real problem. Are you going to flip on macros? That sounds right. Unless
Sure.
someone
Why
has
not
told
have
her
macros
before.
on? Makes my life easier.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if there's one thing that you want to raise, and one thing that I think we're talking about the C-suite, that the C-suite understands is that if you don't train the employees are going to, through foot faults or otherwise, cause some problems, including clicking on those things that you don't want them to click on. The other issue that we're seeing is, how does a company's cyber insurance policy interact with this type of threat, and really all the types of threats that we're going to talk about today? There are, the insurance market in this area is immature. It is growing. It's getting smarter. But I think part of your job should be to go back and say, hey, risk management team, what kind of cyber insurance do you have, if you don't know that already? What will it cover? What won't it cover? Because a lot of companies have the risk managers dealing with the purchase of insurance, and the CISOs dealing with security. And you know what the particularized risks are for your company, and there might not be a full crossover on that Venn diagram between what is insured and what you know the risks to be. So it makes sense to sync up. We are seeing that a lot of the cyber insurance policies that our clients are using are covering for ransomware, and they're covering for not only the hiring of the forensic firm, the law firm, maybe the PR firm as one is necessary, but even the ransom. And some of these insurance companies also have teams that will come in and say, okay, we've seen this before. Let us help you map this out.
So I think it's really interesting that insurance companies are covering the ransom, and I think that doesn't bode well for how much you're going to have to pay.
I
Right.
agree.
Yeah.
It's a bad
that
incentive.
means the price is going to go up, right? Is that what you're...
The price has gone up,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so we've been dealing with ransomware for quite some time, and as the forensic investigators out there, we're hearing about it all the time. I mean, we're getting, at least 3 to 4 calls a week on clients or potential clients that have been victimized by ransomware. That's definitely an uptick from last year, Q4. And the ransomware itself is becoming more sophisticated than what we've been dealing with in years past. The new Tesla Crypt, the new Locky, it has additional functionality. It has, some functionality calling back and maybe exfiltrating data. And so I think we're dealing with ransomware that is getting more sophisticated in a much more sophisticated way. But the ransoms have increased from $500 from one laptop to $5,000 to $10,000 to, if your entire server farm is encrypted, it's $50,000 at the very least.
So let's ask a question in the room. How many people have had insurance to deal with ransomware so far? Right? One? Just one. Let me come back to you. Let's talk about what that policy says. All right? Was there a specific line in the insurance that said, I'm covered for that kind of thing? Or they just give it to you?
No, it was included in the insurance. We discussed it about 3 months ago. So, and it was included in it. And, 2 weeks ago and last week, we had some ransomware in. I know,
Yeah.
but it was not ready. Yeah, so we had to deal with it. But we could solve it, so the insurance policy, we didn't have to go there, but that was it.
Okay. So are you recommending that everybody does this? Is this a thing we should do? Is that what the panel, you guys are saying we should get this insurance? Erin, what do you think?
I definitely think you should put it on the table with your cyber insurance and see how that affects the rate. Insurance companies have been dealing with this. It's a big problem for them. And a lot of companies aren't making claims on their insurance when the ransoms aren't as high. For a $500,000, even $5,000 claim, they're not going to want to tell their insurance company about that because that gets a lot of additional questions, right?
Yep.
So what are you doing? Why didn't you have backups? Maybe we should look at your backup policy. Are you taking local backups off the desktops and laptops at a fairly regular interval? So notifying insurance companies does create a stream of implications that you have to think through before you do that. It's not a simple pay me now and go away.
And I'm done with that.
Right. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, Gus.
Rick, I'm wondering, out of the folks whose hand shot up before, and Rick asked if you've dealt with this problem before, how many
Let's
of
do
you?
that again. Ransomware dealers, how many people had to do this? Okay.
That's a lot lower than it was before.
You just don't want to get called on.
Everybody close your eyes so you can really, no. How many of you dealt with law enforcement? I mean, when this happens, a lot of companies will kick in their incident response plans. And one of the things on the decision tree on your incident response plan is, should we contact law enforcement, and who should we contact law enforcement? What should we say? I'm interested to hear if you got any feedback from law enforcement on that problem, if anyone's willing to talk about it.
All right, absolutely. What did the Fed say when you said we need help with the ransomware?
We can't comment on pending investigations, and this went on for over 2 years. So I'm not sure if it was worth the effort because we never got any type of closed feedback loop in terms of all the effort that we put into it.
Say that again.
The FBI, frankly, wouldn't comment on it because it was a pending investigation, and 2 years later, they just told us that they closed the case, but there's really nothing to find for it. So was the effort worth it?
Let me ask you this, though. Why did you call them? What was the purpose of it?
We had, not necessarily ransomware, but we had a security incident that shook everybody to their core.
Mm-hmm. Well, the question I have is, what Gus was saying, there's a decision loop in there where it says, okay, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. Now, should we call the FBI in to help us with this investigation, yes or no? What was the reason you wanted to call them in?
Frankly, we wanted to go after the bad guys so they felt the pain that they were trying to inflict on others.
Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, we got Oprah's coming.
I might have something to add because I'm from the Netherlands, as you might hear my accent. I'm the CISO of. I'm not from Alabama. No, but in the Netherlands and in Europe, it's becoming a policy now, a data breach policy. So once your data is breached, you have to report it. Mm-hmm. You have to. It's mandatory. You have to report it to the authorities. And if you don't do it good, you don't report it, and they figure out, it costs you €820,000. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have now the policies to report it to the authorities.
So that's in the Netherlands, you're saying, yeah? Do we have that anywhere else? Is that any law anywhere besides the Netherlands that makes you report stuff like that?
Well, I mean, there are certain industry verticals in the United States that have mandatory reporting. DoD contractors, obviously HIPAA, but there is no national data breach law.
And there might be a regulatory type of call that you have to make, right? If it doesn't invoke data disclosure laws because it's not defined as a data breach when your data is just sitting on your system encrypted, right? If it hasn't actually been breached or exfiltrated, you still might have to notify the SEC or other regulatory inquiries that you've had a material event in your network. Mm. So I think that's definitely something you have to go through. I mean, going back to the law enforcement, I mean, I was former federal prosecutor at DOJ before I became a consultant at Stroz Friedberg working in the cyber area, and what we've seen over the past few years is, the feds are inundated with ransomware as well. They're trying to go after the larger variants, the ones that they can connect the dots to, but for the average company who has a $50,000 ransomware claim, it's just not something that they're going to send a team of 10 to help you with. They'll collect information. If they can help you in some way, I'm sure they will, but we've found that there's really nothing that they can do.
And as perverse as it sounds, they have a reputation to uphold. If you guys pay, if the victim pays and the data is not unencrypted, then that gets around the marketplace as well. So though the feds have assiduously not taken an official position on this, I think part of the knowledge around ransomware is, unless you have a backup, if there's no other way to get this data, you can probably be assured that they're going to follow through on their criminal commitment, because they don't want word to get out that they're not following through on their criminal commitment.
In Egypt, I'm from Egypt actually. Oh, okay. It's working like this. Banking institutions, financial institutions, they are by law required to report such kind of incident to the central bank, which is the authority where you should report this. But there isn't really any added value for doing this, because the central bank is like the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. It's not a security authority, and there isn't really any of the similar security or law enforcement bodies in the United States that does take care of cybersecurity in Egypt. So the added value is really nothing.
Not there.
But I have to report, yes.
What country is it?
Egypt.
Egypt. Right, so Egypt's compelling you to do it. We got Netherlands compelling you to do it. The U.S. is not really doing it. Norway is doing it. Okay. Any others? Anybody know? Yes. UK is compelling it right now. I thought that law was kind of. So Sean, I'm going to come to you in a second and talk about why this is kind of rising. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, in a second. So be prepared. All right. Just some facts from Unit 42. We're tracking some 30 different ransomware families right now. Okay. And this has been going on a long time. Erin mentioned this for a long time, but the new ones, okay, are even more nasty than the earlier ones, obviously. Okay. And so the question is, why is this rising? Why is this one taking over from their traditional kind of steal your credit card and stuff to make money?
Well, the big thing is definitely it's lucrative for the cyber criminals. As we've seen from sort of chasing Crypto Wall 3 with the Cyber Threat Alliance, $325 million over a good couple of months, that's how much revenue they actually generated. And as Erin said, the sliding scale has started to move in terms of that payment. It's now gone from 500 to 1,500 in some instances. People are paying. There was one particular family that we were tracking at one point over a 7-week period that amassed $35 million. And so if you think about it from that dynamic, or I guess from the cyber criminal standpoint, it's lucrative. They're going to keep on doing these different types of ransomware style attacks because they know they can make money. And the honest truth is, people are paying it. There is always that fear of, well, if I pay the money, will I get the decryption key? Will it work? Well, think about the dynamic of if you don't get the key, their business model disintegrates. So it's in their best interest to give it to you.
Right. I mean, it's just logical, right? It's one less step to convert for the criminal. Why steal your data and then have to sell your data on the black market? Just do something and get paid directly.
Right.
Yep.
Right? I mean, so it's just a much more direct mechanism for them to get the money. And people are paying. Let's be clear about that.
Yep.
A lot of people are paying, and frankly, it's not a bad idea to set up a Bitcoin wallet and be in a position to make a decision and be ready about it. I mean, those procedures are part of your incident readiness. You need to understand who those critical stakeholders you're going to have to speak to, what the policy decision and the implications of that policy decision are going to be on your company, how bad is it for you, and be an ability to pay quickly because those deadlines come quickly. And the criminals know that they're not going to give you the extra time, right? They know that time is on their side if they put a tight deadline on you. You got to decide one way or the other. And a lot of people are paying, and not unreasonably so.
So this is a perfect opportunity for me to put my commercial hat on and tell you that the reason you wanted to have Palo Alto Network is to prevent them from getting it in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. Detection and paying afterwards is not the way you want to go with this. So that's the first thing. And on Monday we inducted some books into the cybersecurity canon. How many people have heard of my canon project before? All right, y'all, this is homework for you. Look up Canon and Palo Alto Networks. It's a rock and roll Hall of Fame for cybersecurity books. So all the books you should have read by now are there. Okay, one of our committee members is here, Tina. Raise your hand. Okay, we inducted one of our books, Kingpin by Kevin Paulson. Okay, and he's talking about cybercrime before 2010 and how hard it is to make money as a hacker. The hacking part of it is actually the easy part. All right, the hard part is getting the money out, making credit cards, going out to the retail store, buying stuff, and then and then selling on eBay. Okay, that's an 80-hour work week. All right, so that is the reason that we're doing it this way. They don't have to do any of that kind of thing to make more money than than ever. Okay, so I think that's interesting. Right. Gus, you were going to say something. I forgot. You were nodding your head about that.
Oh, I nod whenever you talk, Rick. But actually, the one thing I was going to say was, part of the title of our panel today is C-suite, and just very, very briefly, I think one thing we have to focus on, y'all have to focus on, is the translation aspect here. I mean, I think if you're dealing with an audit or a risk committee with 65, 70-year-old people on it who haven't thought about these issues before, their eyes might glaze over when you talk about ransomware, even though it has one of the most sexy names in cybersecurity. I think the translation, how do we translate this into a language that they understand? We want to talk about the effects. Got to talk about the primary effects of this happening, the lockdown of all your data, or for other types of threat vectors, the loss of the data, the actual breach, the fact that the company's intellectual property might be out there on the street or in the hands of a competitor. And not only that, you can't stop with the primary effects, you have to go to the secondary effects. Company reputation, lawsuits by infinitely creative plaintiffs' lawyers, and regulatory oversight by all of the agencies that we've mentioned, including the SEC, and some that we haven't, including the FTC, state attorneys general, and otherwise. So one takeaway that I'd like to put on the table is let's translate this into a language that they can understand, so they then support you in your important mission at the company.
Yeah, and do your homework, like Rick was saying, right? Before you have the discussion with your C-level executives and your board of directors, make sure their computers are backed up and how often. And so that, their first question is going to be like, well, could they get access to my computer? Could they have access to my data? I see that all the time in board of directors meeting. You need to have the quick answer, and then obviously go into a more broader, comprehensive preparedness plan. But the fact of the matter is the ransomware is evolving, and it's a threat that everybody has to be aware of.
So, yes, sir. Oh, John. Yes, sir.
I guess the big question is who has regulatory oversight, right? So if the hacker is some random person in Amsterdam or Pakistan, I'm not really sure that anybody really has jurisdiction. Or if I go to Nordstrom's and I take something, or if I do something, the local authorities have the jurisdiction. And without a governance forum that covers this, we will continue, whether it's ransomware or something else, we will continue to have these issues. So I guess what are the thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I don't think the FBI would question their jurisdiction because I think that they consider themselves to be the appropriate law enforcement agency for cyber crimes of that nature, cyber extortion in particular. The Secret Service usually handles more financial-based crimes, when credit cards are stolen or financial institutions are hacked into. So I don't think that they're going to quibble with you going to them as the appropriate agency, but you're right, their ability to effectively investigate these crimes and put an end to it when these international organizations are implicated it's complex. We see that with just normal hacking organizations that are operating out of foreign countries. You have to work with, through the treaties of your foreign countries, you have to work with their law enforcement. That oftentimes is not consistent with your view of law enforcement and what you ought to be able to do to the suspects. And so it's a very complex area, but not unlike what we've seen traditionally in other cyber crimes.
So from a U.S.-centric point of view, just talking about the FBI, they're starting to change their mantra, though. How many of you have actually called the FBI and just have a conversation with them about general health? Anybody done that recently? We just did this last month at Palo Alto Networks, and that was eye-opening. Because traditionally, 10 years ago, the FBI has put people in jail. That was their main focus, Now there's more of, let's see if we can help organizations keep themselves safe, in whatever form that has. And they have lots of resources to put to bear on problems you might have. So I recommend calling your local law enforcement in the U.S., and I'm sure it's that way in other foreign countries. And just ask them what they can do to help you when you get into a crisis situation.
Rick, this is top down. Jim Comey was at RSA, as you know, and he said it to the assembled crowd. Please get to know your local FBI district office. Yeah. Have them over. Let's talk about the threats. You know, back to your question for just 1 second. I think part of the problem in the U.S. is that we have agencies like the FBI who don't have any problem with their jurisdiction. Right. And other agencies like my old home, Department of Homeland Security, that's designed to help share information between the public sector and the private sector. So they're there to help. And you also have agencies, and we've mentioned some already, like the SEC and the FTC, who take the company that is the victim of this crime, though it's a cyber crime, and very frequently bring enforcement actions or investigations against them. So this sort of schizophrenia between some of the agencies of the government that are helping the victim and some that are investigating the victim is causing a reluctance on companies' parts to automatically bring in law enforcement when something happens that is worthy of that. And I think the last panel was the public policy panel, but one of the things that we should think about is demanding more of our government to get that straightened out.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So let's recap. Oh, I had a question. All right. So how do we protect ourselves from ransomware? Okay. Number one, buy Palo Alto Networks gear. Did we get that? Okay. Number one. Number two, I think we said make sure your backup scheme is working. Okay, that your files are somewhere else on the machine that you're working on. Probably do that in lots of places. Anybody watching Mr. Robot on USA TV? Okay, right. Their whole storyline last year was hacking a big evil core and destroying their data, not only locally but in all the places they had it backed up. Right. So make sure you're keeping track of that. And if you're not watching Mr. Robot, you guys all should be fired. Okay. All right, the third thing is insurance. We say insurance is a thing we should have in our back pocket just in case it all goes bad. Was there a fourth one? Yes, sir.
Where does configuration management, like making sure things are up to date to avoid drive-by installations of ransomware, figure in this continuum, the things we've been talking about?
John, you want to grab that?
Sure. I think that's probably just basic hygiene. And I know that it's difficult, and I know that we've been talking about, patch applications, patch operating systems, make sure that we've got that sort of cadence in place. It's hard.
It's not sexy.
No, and it's not sexy either. A recent organisation that I went to said that they'd claimed that they've got over 2,000 applications they use in their environment today. And that's what they know. How they actually came up with that one is an interesting question anyway. But think about it. 2,000 applications, on average, you've always got change that happens in those applications. Things go out of date, some patches don't get applied, sometimes there's no patch. We need to be thinking about it from a couple of different angles, which is have a risk mitigation strategy in place, not just simply relying on how do I patch, because there sometimes may not be a patch. The other aspect is we need to make sure that we can start to monitor or have this continuous monitoring in place to work out, has something actually deviated from baseline? What is normal? And start to work out what that is. So it's not a single silver bullet that's going to be out there that's going to solve it all. We need to be thinking about it from a couple of different angles.
Well, and I also think patching, there needs to be a paradigm shift with relation to your patching, right? Patching has been viewed historically as an operational assignment, like making sure that, the applications are going to run and the bugs are going to be fixed. But it is an essential security element now. It is one of the top reasons why companies are infected, not only with ransomware, but other kinds of malicious software. So your patch management system has now gone from being tedious and operationally important to still being quite tedious, but more security important. And now it's taking a much bigger role in discussions with respect to breach response.
Yep. Probably just to add to that one as well, from a threat perspective, what we're seeing pretty much popping up a lot of the times is the use of an exploit toolkit. And if you look at something like Angler, it's probably the most popular one these days, it's simply looking at a range of 30 different vulnerabilities that could exist on someone's machine. They say, oh great, you're using Internet Explorer, unpatched vulnerability, I'll use that one. Or you've got Silverlight installed, So think about not just simply the applications that are there, all the plugins that potentially could be there, and just how would you mitigate that?
So I roll up configuration management inside of the prevention bucket. Okay, I know you've heard us at Palo Alto say all you have to do is buy our stuff and you're prevention. No, someone has to take time to make sure it's all right. And we've been talking about this all week. Is what are you showing in your security operations center, so you know that your deployed security controls are doing what you thought they were doing in the first place, right? And this is really hard to do, right? But that's something we all need to work on as an industry. So, okay, good. So that's 4. We have 4 things. I think we've solved the problem by now.
I just have a question coming back to cyber insurance and how you on the panel would gauge the respective maturity of the cyber insurance industry, respective to the difficulties in managing and gauging risk inside of a highly fluid and dynamic configuration, understanding of critical assets, etc. in the industry. I just find that a challenging task for insurance companies who are looking to make money.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, right, is, and I'm sure that a lot of people have noticed that 5 years ago you had a couple of the insurance companies that got out in front of cyber insurance. They created these sort of easy packages that they felt would be really appealing to the basic customer. And what we're finding out now is there's not one size fits all in terms of cyber insurance, and it's really a complicated discussion for you. We see the rates going up, obviously, because you've got major coverage events happening. We see more insurance companies wanting to get into the market that you really need to start taking a look at instead of going to the ones that have been doing it for a long time, because they're being more creative about how they're posturing their bundles. And we talk to them all the time because obviously we work for a lot of companies when we're doing forensic investigations and incident response that want to invoke their insurance, and so we want to make sure that that's possible. But we also have been talking with them about why can't companies get a discount for doing some proactive measures, kind of like a driver's education discount. You show that you've done a program and you get a discount on your insurance because you're better than the average bear. And so we're having these discussions. They are out there, they're running business, they want to make money, but I think that they need to take a more sophisticated approach to it, and I think you're going to be seeing that and hopefully engaging in better discussions. Yeah, the 20, fill this out and here's your insurance policy.
Well, I think as the industry, we have to be better at tying the prevention controls to actually being useful to making the insurance go down. That data, I don't think, we don't have that anywhere, right?
Right.
So until we get that, the insurance guys are going to be slow to do that. Was there a question in the back before we change gears? All right, I think we've got 10 minutes. Oh, really? 5 or 10? 15 minutes. All right, we got time. All right. So I had 2 more topics I wanted to talk about. Let's put it to a vote which one you want to do, all right? One of the things in the news is hackers going after senior executives and tricking them into transferring funds to some offshore location. We can talk about that, right? Or we can talk about insider threat. So let's take a vote. Who wants to talk about insider threat? Okay. Stupid executives. Insider threat, it looks like we're going to talk about. All right. So insider threat's been going on. We all became aware of it more or less after the Snowden incident. All of a sudden we went, that could really happen to us. It turns out to protecting against insider threat, and Gus, I'm going to come to you for a second about what the board is saying about these kinds of things, all right? And Tina has a question, so hang on one second. So it's really hard to get this done and and it's kind of an expensive program you have to build in order to prevent yourself or protect yourself from this. So Tina, I'll go to you.
It was more a comment. Actually, it was more a comment. Actually, the executives are the insider threat when they're manipulated by the. But it's important. But it's important to recognize that insider threat is not just the bad actor trying to get in. It's the bad actor manipulating the people who are already inside.
Yep.
So Gus, has insider threat made it to the board, to the C-suite? Are they thinking about that in their day-to-day things?
It depends. Company by company is different. But I think when they talk to their security professionals, when they talk to you, they understand that insider threat is exactly as Tina said, not just the bad guy trying to get in. I mean, a lot of what we see is inadvertence. we see innocent mistakes, we see stupid mistakes. All of these things have the same result. So it's almost as though we have to take, not almost, we have to take an all hazards approach in that it doesn't exactly matter who the bad guy was, if it's the guy in the hoodie that we always see on the slides or a guy in a tie or someone who works at your company. It's the result of either the bad guy getting your employee's username and password and getting privileged access that way, or the employee with privileged access doing something stupid with the privileged access. The boards understand this, but frankly, there's still a lot of questions about what to do about it. We've talked about our New York Stock Exchange Navigating the Digital Age Guide, copies of which are available outside.
Nicely done. Nice transition.
And
those are free, by the way. All right, so you should get one as you go out. All right, go ahead.
A lot of companies that are thinking about this are thinking about it alongside trade secret protection. So, traditionally we think about PII, but you have to expand your view to all of the things that are important to the company, including intellectual property. What do we do to protect intellectual property? You make sure that everybody with a username and a password doesn't have access to everything. Even if you have a need, and need to know is really the watchword here, to see some aspect of the company's intellectual property. You're working on the wing of the plane. You don't need to see the engine of the plane. So this type of segmentation control and access control that we think about for protecting a company's intellectual property also benefits us when we talk about the insider threat, whether it's malicious or inadvertent, because these folks are not going to be able to, if a bad guy gets the credentials, they're not going to be able to get all around your network, and somebody who's stupid is not going to be able to do as much damage as they would ordinarily be able to.
I agree with that totally, right? So let's ask the crowd, how many people have had to deal with an insider threat incident in your organizations? Not that many, okay? How many of you guys that raised your hand, was it really material to your business? Can you give an overview of what it was without any detail?
And I can actually share some of the details. That was the last Loki attack, Loki/Drydex attack. I work for a bank, so the disclosure of our information and encryption of our systems is a very, very damaging impact for us. So yes, it was a severe impact. We managed to contain it. And yes, the backups didn't work. I can assure you that. But at least because we are, most of our data is stored in centralized systems, and those systems has not been impacted. Most of the machines that were impacted were PCs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the information we have in documents stored on PCs is not really important. What is really important is customer information stored in databases. So the impact was not severe from an information point of view. However, there was many computers impacted.
So, we inducted another book into the cybersecurity canon on Monday. It's called The Cert's Guide to the Insider Threat, written by Don Campelli and two other people that I can't remember their names right now, right? All right. And that is the book. If you want to figure out how to protect yourself from insider threat, you need to go get that book right now and read it. It is based on now about 1,200 cases that they have gone through and figured out what happens when an insider attack happens. And they've broken it down into three things. Okay, it's fraud, it's stealing of intellectual property, and it is what's the word I want? Damage to the company because the employee is mad. Okay, they're mad at you for some reason, all right? And in the book, Don lays out 16 prescriptive prevention controls that you can do to protect yourselves from that. So I asked her on Monday night, out of all the 16, what's the most important thing you should do? She said the most important thing you do, the first thing, the low-hanging fruit, is get with your HR department and notice who's leaving the company. And make sure you are watching what they were doing 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they leave the company, right? Because that's when a lot of the intellectual property leaves, because some employees think they're entitled to that. Right? I thought that was very interesting. Yes, sir.
On the topic of actually seeing things that the insiders are doing before they leave, are is anyone seeing an actual adoption? Because I'm seeing these technologies out there, but is anyone seeing an actual adoption of like the user behavioral analytics technologies or things like that as far as network monitoring to actually see more? Because that's always a hard discussion that I have, which when you have to have that discussion about, well, how much do we want to be the NSA within our organization and know every file that everyone is moving and everywhere they're touching it? And is anyone really doing that yet? Because I'm seeing a slow adoption on that technology right now.
Excellent question. So I'm turning to you guys to see if you know if anybody's doing that.
Yeah.
Anybody here doing any of that right now? You guys are doing it? So there's a product called David Gravity that's going to help you do it. Erin, you had some.
Yeah, I mean, we have a division at Stroz Friedberg. We have a product, like you mentioned, proprietary product. It's really based on psycholinguistic analysis, so it ingests.
Wait, say that again.
Psycholinguistic analysis.
You're not making that up, right?
No, I
Okay,
couldn't
great.
make it up. I couldn't make up a term like that. It's actually created by a bunch of our researchers and a former FBI profiler, and it really takes emails and talks about a heat map within your environment of disgruntled employees and angry employees and employees that are likely to leave. And we're seeing that adopted in critical infrastructure and highly regulated companies where there's less of a push against a privacy concern. And in that situation, right, that's not, no person is reading all those emails. It's not a content-based. There are algorithms that are being used and then analyzed if necessary with legal counsel, HR, psychologists to sort of understand the implications to the company. But I think where I'm seeing it adopted, and probably reasonably so, are in these higher regulated industries like financial institutions or critical infrastructure like airline industry or rail industry or anything that could be implicated in a a significant way.
So I asked Dawn this question on Monday night about, do you just turn that stuff on all the time and watch your employees like the NSA? She said, no, that's not really what she recommends. There's a bunch of precursor activity that is not technical that you need to be looking for, that employees and supervisors are watching their employees for these kinds of behaviors, and she lists them out in the book. And if you see some of those pop up, then you turn those technical things on, all right, and then watch them closely for the next couple of weeks before they leave the company, all right? So I thought that was a pretty deep insight. Anybody else have a formal insider threat program going on in the company? Yep, yes, sir.
Just a quick comment on the question that gentleman had. He was asking the insider threat program. Our insider threat programs looking to like two tools. Like on the big data analysis part, I think one is Splunk has a user behavior kind of analysis tool. It's based on the logs and we see internally. And also the other one we're looking at is I think it's called Astra from Teradata. Same concept, big data. Try to data mining from those logs, figure out who's doing who's the who's the threat for the organization. Yeah, our insider threat teams are experimenting, they're kind of POCing those two tools. Teradata has one called Astra, and also Splunk has something called I think it's called UBA, User Behavior Analysis, something like that. Yeah.
Ours is called Scout, and I think the difference, right, but there is one is where you're trying to predict it before the exfiltration of data happens, and those that you mentioned are trying to look at where the data is going and if they see large spikes in data, right, and then say, okay, we see some unusual off the baseline activity from these users, we can go and investigate it, but the data's already gone out, right? So two different ways to deal with the problem. I would also add, some of the best defense to insider threat are basic things that go to the old adage, security comes at the price of convenience. When your executives are asking you about insider threat, some of the best basic solutions are stuff they don't want to do, like disable the use of USB drives or disable the use of cloud, cloud operations where they can upload Google Docs or Box or what have you. These make life and business very convenient and fast, and security of those operations to lock down your environment and prioritize your data, like Gus has been saying, that's going to inconvenience people, and it's just a cultural decision you have to make, is how much inconvenience are you going to be willing to take to better secure your environment from both insider and outsider threat.
It's to your point, I don't know about the rate of adoption, but we think it's a good idea to adopt a program that, that looks at this flow of data, because recently someone published a report that said 50% of users, 50% of your employees reuse username and password across various sites. So if some 5K fun run username and password database is getting hacked, that may very well contain credentials to get into your network. So if we're not looking at, is this user doing something that he or she should not be doing? Is the data flow greater than it should be? Are they poking around parts of our network that we don't expect them to? Then we're missing the fact that it's a lot less expensive for the bad guy to go on Pastebin and buy these usernames and passwords and just keep hitting your network with them until they get in and find their way to a privileged user than it is to deploy a very expensive ODay on your network. We have to assume that, that the insider threat might not actually be Mike in accounting, but somebody sitting in another country who has Mike in accounting's credentials.
Yep.
All right, so we're at the end, okay? I'm going to come to the panel 30-second takeaway at the end of this, right? What did we learn from all this, right? I hope you guys got something out of this. I think I did. I'll tell you my takeaway. Here's what I learned. I'm in the wrong business. We should all be hackers. They make a lot more money than all of us. Sean?
A big takeaway that I can always sort of recommend to people is test your backups. If you've got concerns around ransomware, if it's something that's been talked about, especially at the board level, I know a lot of people put their hands up and said they have been impacted. Make sure you've got a program in place to back up, test your backup strategy, work out where your backups actually are, and work out what is the actual process in the event that something does go wrong. You've got that very quick checklist to work out what do you do.
Well, I think my big takeaway is talk to the people in the C-suite and the board of directors if you have the ability to, in a way that they understand, and that really boils down to the primary effects of the various risks and attacks that you're seeing out there, some of which we talked about today, as well as the secondary effects. What are the agencies out there who are going to be sniffing around? Who's going to sue us and for what? What kind of data do we have on our networks that is of interest to the bad guys, and what would happen if that's stolen, altered, deleted, or captured by ransomware? And I'll mention one more thing, which is the other topic that got voted down unceremoniously by the crowd, the business email compromise. We won't get into the details of it, but a lot of the bad guys, and you've probably seen this, are replicating your domain name and changing one letter, or doing instead of .com, .co. And they're using that to mimic people, either websites where they harvest credentials or email to folks in your company to do nefarious things. So one of the very practical things that I think you guys can do as security personnel is monitor, it's all public information, monitor the domains that are being registered that look a heck of a lot like yours, and either try to take them down through the registrar, or you could call your lawyers and go through something called the UDRP process, which is something that ICANN has set up to allow companies in a very summary way to take down violative domains.
Awesome. Erin?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with everything that's been said. I think, from my point of view, acting quickly equals mitigating damage within your environment. And so it doesn't matter what you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with account takeover or ransomware. Your ability to act quickly and effectively is what is going to win the day. And some of that is just your preparedness, which is probably the last thing that you want to do. It's one of those proactive, pie in the sky kind of efforts you'd like to have time for, but you never get to because there's 10 other fires to put out that day. But start acting to get your incident response plan in place, to do some tabletops, to talk to your stakeholders. And if you don't have the resources, get help, because documenting your defensive posture with preparedness is going to really help you and translate it into time and money saved as a result, and help defend your organization as being prepared.
Fantastic. So we are at the end. Can you guys all give the panel members a hand? They did a fantastic job. Thank you all. We'll see you at the next one.